Hello, everybody. Welcome to Reddit Roast number 19. John, lovely to see you again, sir.
Happy Friday, Sam.
Happy Friday. Let's get stuck in. So, John, I know I say this every week, but a genuinely very, very interesting bunch of profiles today. We've got somebody who's Ivy League but unemployed and is making his own mead. We've got someone who makes a living betting on sports. The question is, can they sanitize that enough for top MBA programs? We've got a big four consultant with way unrealistic expectations, at least I think. We've got someone who's treating the MBA as an expensive vacation, which it's not uncommon. So we'll talk about that. We've got someone who's moved jobs, John, 3 times in 3 years. We'll see how that's going to affect their chances. And we've got somebody who's deciding between an MBA and a JD MBA. And we'll assess the pros and cons of that situation. And spoiler, he hates lawyers. So we'll see how that goes. Okay. So, John, first profile then. We have here at 26-year-old Indian software engineer. So very, very classic profile. Indian male applying to Stanford, Wharton, MIT, Kellogg, Yale, LBS, INSEAD. Okay. 3.9 GPA from an Ivy League undergrad. Interesting. Graduated with distinction, dean's lists, couple of scholarships, etc. Has a 331 GRE. 331. 4 years of work experience, but has been on a sabbatical for the past year, supporting his mum through terminal illness. Sorry about that, OP. I think that's going to play a part in your application. Worked as a software engineer in a couple of startups, promoted twice. Led medium to large size projects in both startups, a lot of scaling experience, also interned as a hedge fund back in the day. Extracurriculars. John, I had to Google this, but apparently Philosophy Olympiad is a thing. And OP has a medal from doing that, has been writing and making his own mead. Bit of sports background, volunteering background, etc. Goals, transition into tech adjacent roles. So software engineer transitioning to tech consultant, corporate strategy in tech, leadership development program in tech, maybe product manager, although not super interested in that. And wants an MBA to enable that pivot. Basically, the narrative here, John, is that he's been wearing multiple hats in these in this software engineering work, growing these startups, and wants to focus on doing that after the MBA. So it seems like quite a solid set of reasoning there. Wants to talk about this pivot, wants to understand whether the schools feel like a good fit and how to position that sabbatical as well. So, John, a lot of classic features here in this profile. Let's dig in. How do you see this profile?
Well, I like this profile overall, Sam. I think it's pretty classic, but there are a couple of zingers in there that I quite like. So we'll start overall with the headline. I think OP has a solid academic foundation and coupled with something else. This something else is something that helps a lot of software engineers stand out from the pack. I think the philosophy angle with the Olympiad is something that works really well for OP. And we can dive into this later. Academically, 3.9 CS degree from an Ivy, 331 with a strong Q. That is right on the money, even for an ORM such as himself.
Right.
Professionally, software engineering with some quick promos. Look, I mean, all the cross-functional collaboration, leading projects, taking on duties that, some product managers take on, that's something that would really look really good for OP, and it's, in their best interest to get their recommenders to vouch them for it and take advantage of all the great experience. Sorry to hear about the sick parent, OP. This is absolutely something that you should mention in your optional essay. We can talk a little bit more about how to message this and OP's narrative, but over to you first, Sam.
Yeah. Okay. So I think what you're saying is overall academics very strong. Software engineering. I mean, we have a lot of software engineer applicants, especially at the moment. But within the world of software engineering, not a bad set of, no bad
Yeah.
experience. I'm not seeing, and maybe I need to read this more, but I'm not seeing any like big tech brands on there, which would obviously help. It seems to be more startup focused. Right. Interesting. I mean, there's a lot of different angles to take here. Let's talk about extracurriculars first.
Yeah.
It sounds like to me that these extracurriculars, and OP, you can correct us if we're wrong on this, that it sounds like mostly solo stuff. I'm not
Hmm.
seeing that much in the way of
Hmm.
like community building activities. And those are the gems in terms of extracurriculars that we love to see, because schools like Wharton ask,
Yeah.
how are you going to contribute to our community? And it's always nice to start those stories with an anecdote of how you contributed to a community in the past. These
Hmm.
sound like solo activities mostly. Now, maybe there's something in there that we've missed in this, short profile evaluation, but
Hmm.
that's really, really interesting to me, or really important to me. Do you think, John, that are you seeing anything here that could stand out in terms of extracurriculars?
Well, I do like those extracurriculars, but I do agree with you, Sam. Those are very solo focused.
Yeah.
Certainly, there are opportunities for OP to bring out how, he's expressed these hobbies in a team setting. So, for maybe for the wine hobby, it's leading wine tastings, leading blind wine tastings, or helping other folks get through.
Creating that like out of nothing.
Right. Correct. Or helping others, coaching people through the wine exam.
Yeah.
Speaking from someone who has really recently gotten into wine and also lead blind wine tastings, so this is an area of interest of mine as well. But look, archery, helping other folks break into tech, archery, I mean, it's a film, it's all very interesting. I think there might be an opportunity for all of these hobbies they're all hobbies, right? Is there an
Yeah.
opportunity for OP to talk about this somewhere in their long-term goal? I think too often I hear people, it's very hard for me to meet others. It's hard to make friends in your early 30s. I'm just spitballing here, Sam, but there could be something around building something, a hobby-based app or an organization that brings people together through these hobbies. But as of now, and as of it stands today, these are pretty individually focused and they're a little bit over the place. And
Yeah.
so that could be somewhat of a flag. It's not taking away from the fact that OP has great ACs, ECs. It's just, are they the right ones for these business school applications?
Yeah. I wonder if there's a community or team contribution in the philosophy Olympiad. Man, I'm not
Oh,
gonna lie,
absolutely.
like, I'm not a philosopher and I have no exposure to philosophy Olympiads. I would be very out of place. But there might be some team component to that. Or there
Hmm.
might be at least like a collaboration. Because when you're philosophizing, I imagine you kind of go up against people. There must be
Sure.
some sort of competitive element if he's a medalist. So
Yeah.
maybe there's a way of forging a narrative that's a bit team based or a bit community based around that.
Hmm.
Because it does seem like the EC that stands out, both from an originality perspective and from an
Hmm.
achievement perspective.
Yeah.
Cool. All right, let's talk about these goals. So, OP is a software engineer. There are anyone watching, look, there are so many software engineers applying to business school at the moment. So many. Whether it's AI disrupting software engineering, whether it's like a booming market, because whatever, like there's just a lot. So you need
Hmm.
to stand out here. And one of the key ways to stand out is to have a set of really solid goals. Now, OP has mentioned a few decent goals here, specifically tech consulting, corporate strategy in tech, leadership development program, PM, but that's quite a broad set. So, John,
Hmm.
what I thought we'd do is help OP narrow down and think about those goals in a constructive way. And one idea that I'd had is I'd like to create a career narrative, like pencil, just rough out idea of
Hmm.
a career
Hmm.
narrative. Now, OP, you can think of this as like Wharton Essay One, right? What do you want to do? Why do you want to do an MBA? You can think of this as like why Stanford, because as you're going to see, the goals tend to lead into why you need an MBA and why you need a school. So think of this as an outline of your Wharton Essay One, basically. I'm imagining a story that opens, or an essay that opens with a story about what OP liked in his software engineering role. Right. So maybe it's a story of meeting some clients and really enjoying
Hmm.
that face to face interaction. Maybe it's a story of working with investors and the negotiations involved. Maybe it's talking about strategizing high level decisions with one of these startups that he's been involved with. But opening with a story that kind of exemplifies what he enjoyed, right? That's chapter one of this framework. Moving into a goal that's something along the lines of, I want to do that more after the MBA. And to do that, I want to transition into a client-facing role as a consultant, a corporate strategy role where I'll be strategizing constantly. So that's the short-term goal. However, for that, I need new skills, right?
Mhm.
If I could do that already, I would, but I need an MBA. So for that, I need new skills. What skills might you need? Strategy frameworks,
Strategy frameworks, market
formal
sizing,
leadership training,
finance. Yep.
finance, accounting, etc., to be able to make that move. And for those skills, these are some classes, some clubs, some professors that attract me at the school that I'm applying to. So what we've done there is we've gone through from a story to a goal to skills to the school. 4 clear chapters, 500-word essay, 125 words per chapter. Job done. So OP, I hope that gives you a bit of an outline for how you could structure your career goals based on this story, which is what you wanted to do in one of your,
Mhm.
you wanted some advice on how to tie this all together. Hopefully that's of value. John, I know I've spent quite a long time on this profile, but I quite enjoyed it. Is there anything I'm missing?
I think when we talk a little bit about, OP's narrative, I think one opportunity is to talk about the opportunity or the problem that he sees in the industry today, right? I enjoy, I've enjoyed this, but in diving into this more, I've realized that, or I've noticed, or I've seen this happen, and it's not being addressed, and I want to address it, and this is why I am well placed to address this problem.
Nice. And that could set up the long-term goal, for example.
Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, good. So quite an open-ended profile evaluation there, but I think the long and the short of it is I'd say this candidate is M7 material, but does need to work on those goals to stand out.
Understood.
Cool. All right, let's move on to the next profile then. We have a professional sports bettor, John. I love these kinds of stories. Okay, so again, targeting M7 and INSEAD. Undergrad GPA non-target school finance 3.7. Hasn't taken the GMAT yet, but is confident. Yeah, we see that a lot. We'll see. Work experience, 6 months at a Chinese mobile gaming company during COVID, 16 months at Big Four in valuations, and then 3 years as an entrepreneur. Now, as we learn more about what that entrepreneurship involved, he was working in valuations and he got to the point in a Big Four consultancy, so think like an EY type, Deloitte type firm, got to the point where my earnings from my sports betting outside of work was generating 3 times the income from my job. So I decided to quit and focus on betting full time. I spent the last 3 years doing that, earned a bunch of money, and wants to pivot into an MBA because he thinks his trading edge is going to be gone. I love these kinds of stories. John, high level profile evaluation before we get into this sports betting theme, please.
This is kind of like you're sort of going into an area that is a little controversial, but like you, Sam, I find this profile very interesting. It's a unique one.
Yep.
Do tread carefully with the sports betting because sports betting has upended many lives. Yeah, on with the metrics, strong GPA. Let's hope for a commensurate test score. The professional experience working in the gaming company, aligns well with the sports betting and hopefully with OP's narrative. Demographic unspecified. I'm assuming maybe Asian, given the nature of that sports betting company, of the mobile gaming company. I'm sorry. Not much to go on, Sam, but I'd love to dig into this narrative because this is going to be a hairy one.
All right. So I'm going to take a stance on this. Right. I used to work at a high frequency trading house, right? I know I'm not going to sit here and go, well, betting is bad. You shouldn't be doing that. And I'm not going to come at that at all. I understand that sports betting of this caliber means arbing across markets, right? It means you're not just betting on games and taking a punt on whether XYZ team is going to score. What it is it's trading the odds between 2 platforms and arbing those and trying to generate a risk-free profit. And it's, it's the same thing that people do in finance and generate billions of dollars. And over there, it's seen as fine. In sports betting, for some reason, it's got a bad rep. Look, I'm not going to take that stance at all. I think there's value here. But we need to package this in a way that is palatable to the business schools. Now, John, I want to hear your thoughts, but some of the ideas I had for how to sanitize and formalize this sports betting background. Right. One, I think you need to set it up as much as you can as like an asset management firm, right? It's not just you and your underpants betting like that. No, it's a company. It's, Ocean something asset management, right? It's got a title. It's got a formal name. Can you bring in outside capital to formalize that even more? Can you build a website? Can you have a LinkedIn page? Right? And all of a sudden, you're not just sports betting, you are the founder of an asset manager. And that, in the eyes of business schools, looks really, really nice. Now, it might involve, moving your investments away from just sports and maybe focusing on doing a bit of other markets as well. So you can justify that. Maybe you have some equity derivatives trades in there as well. It's all the same skills anyway. And again, just formalize this and broaden it and remove that focus on sports betting. That way, it could be palatable and you're positioning yourself as an entrepreneur, not a gambler. John, thoughts?
That is right on the money, Sam. I like the idea of washing that pot with a couple things that are not sports betting related. Look, I think at the end of the day, it's focusing less on the nature of betting and more of, of the underlying skills associated with delivering a risk, a calculated risk-free return. It's not, I convinced Bobby to stop by the store and buy some lotto. It's about, hey, there's a real opportunity to make money based on these patterns I'm seeing, and position OP as someone who's an expert in this function, not in the area of not in the nature of making a buck from who wins the the Spurs game or a soccer
and
game.
by the way, as we think about this, the next steps, if you did set this up as a asset manager and try and formalize it to some extent, that sets up some really nice goals, right? If you've already set up an asset management business of your own, pivoting to an established hedge fund, that could be a post-MBA goal that you could write about. Even growing this business, right? You're talking about your edge in sports betting maybe getting eaten away in the next year or so. But what about, there's another industry out there, another market out there that you can expand into and equity derivatives that we talked about earlier. For example, I want to do an MBA to take this company that has been focused on XYZ market and reposition it to focus on ABC market. That goal would also make sense here. It's starting to take shape. Okay, so I think my conclusion is I actually quite like this, but we are going to need that GMAT score to come in 760. He's obviously looking at the old test. I would like to see 705, 715 would be really nice. And doesn't sound like that's beyond the realms of possibility, because OP is clearly quant, very, very quant strong if he's doing this all day long. So come back with a 705, and OP, we'd love to help you form that narrative. It's really, really nice. Okay, John, next project, next profile. So 26-year-old male Bangladeshi, born and raised, moved to Canada for university, 326 GRE. Education was BCom, finance major from UBC Soda, T1, Canadian Business School, fine, 3.7 GPA. Big Four risk consulting out of the Toronto office, up for promotion, working mostly with financial institutions to identify vulnerabilities in their software or workflow. Oh, John, I'm getting tired just reading this. That sounds so dull. Okay. Internship with a boutique investment bank. Fine. Risk assurance practice for another Toronto-based Big Four. Data analysts. Extracurriculars. Core member of an association that helps young Bangladeshi grads and corporates connect and socialize with community. Quite nice. Working as a mentor to support mentees in job searches. Okay. Started a podcast. Okay. Member of a university's consulting club. Interesting. Why MBA? Want to move into strategy consulting, MBB in particular. Currently trying to figure out a network transfer, sorry, a transfer internally to pivot into the strategy consulting wing of the current firm. In other words, going from like EY risk consulting to EY Parthenon, which is their strategy consulting work. Okay, really enjoys consulting. That's nice. But he's focused on Harvard, Stanford, Wharton, M7 or bust. Oof,
Ooh.
pretty aggressive. Has checked my GRE against the medians of M7 and pretty much at par. Okay. Years of work experience is slightly on the low side, has 2.2 to 2.5 years of work experience at applying. It's not slightly on the low side, it's as low as can be and still can apply. Debating delaying by a couple of years, and wants a profile evaluation. Oof. John, good luck. How do you see that profile?
Well, not to be the bearer of puns, but M7 is a little bit of a risk for this consultant.
Okay.
I think everything is pretty solid. I mean, it's a little dull, but there are ways to make what you do sound a little bit more interesting on paper, especially when you work with different types of analysis instruments. Indian Canadian academics aren't the most stellar. I would
Bangladeshi.
say,
I think he'd be
oh,
offended by that. Bangladeshi
okay,
Canadian.
yes, Bangladeshi Canadian, which I would say is slightly more underrepresented than in Americans among B schools. I would play that up in their demographics. But look, I mean, a 326 with a pretty good Q is still going to be a tough sell for M7. That's my thoughts on OP's academics. Professionally, look, I mean, still on the younger side. OP's considering applying to an MBA program a year from now. I would maybe consider applying 2 years from now, although having already been promoted to senior consultant is a strong reflection of traction within the company. I like OP's extracurriculars. Overall, I don't see any major red flags in OP's profile. It just needs to jump off the page for M7 to get into M7. And I don't see anything currently that makes me go, wow.
Yeah, interesting about that timeline. My understanding of this, and I may have misread it, my understanding is that OP is considering applying now with 2.5 years of work experience here when applying, right? So the question is whether to apply with 2.5 or 3.5. Okay, we'll see. All right, John, I'm gonna. For me, I said it when I was describing the profile. For me, this just sounds so damn boring. Like, how do you position Big Four risk consulting as sexy for an MBA application? I mean, genuinely, like, what would you do?
Well, there are ways to drum up some drama in your time as a risk consultant. There are also opportunities to play up your extracurriculars, as well as maybe your involvement in employee resource groups or ERGs within your firm. I think that this is going to be tough unless you have a dramatic or exciting client encounter that you can write about in your lead. Other than that, there's only so much you can furnish out of your experience at the firm.
Interesting. I wonder if like a time when it went wrong would
Yeah.
be like that would probably
Yeah.
be the most exciting story you could come up with, right? I
Yeah.
was risk consulting and like a colleague missed this glaring gap and poof, it blew up and it was carnage and this is why the work's important.
Yeah.
And here's what I want to do after it. Like, and I, stepped
Mhm.
in to help the client mitigate and fix the
Mhm.
issue. And
Mhm.
that's what I want to do afterwards as a consultant, as an
Mhm.
MBB. I
Yeah.
reckon that's probably the most exciting way of framing it. Actually, it's a really good spot. Okay. Let's talk about this GRE score. 326. I want to just emphasize, to me, that looks low for M7 for this profile. Yes, people get in with, and as OP has correctly identified, this is more or less in line with the averages of the M7 schools. But we know from experience that if you are coming from an overrepresented background, whether that's an overrepresented demographic, overrepresented work, yeah, you're expected to have a GRE score, GMAT score that is above the average. It's just the way it works. If you're up against consultants who are smart, who are, oh, what have I done there? If you are up against consultants who are smart, who are competitive, who are dedicating time to GRE scores, to GRE studying, they have a higher GRE on average. And you have to do better than average, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
There are people who get in, obviously, by definition, with lower than average scores, but they tend to be, non-mother tongue English because they're struggling with the verbal side. They tend to be people who have got very sort of typical, non-typical profiles that perhaps struggle with standardized testing. I mean, military applicants often can get away with a slightly lower GRE score, not Big Four consultants, I'm afraid. So as OP talks about schools, is targeting M7 or bust. I fear this might be a bust. I really do. There's a strong chance. OP slightly, I don't want to say arrogantly, but I would love to know how competitive I'd be for T15. I feel confident about these. Honestly, I wouldn't be confident at T15s. I really wouldn't. This profile needs a very good polish to be competitive at T15, let alone M7, in my opinion. Am I being too harsh, John?
Nope. I think OP is being a little bit confident. Risk profile needs adjusting. That's what I will say.
It's a very diplomatic way of saying it. Okay, good. Right, I'm going to upvote that anyway, because that's what we do. Right, John, next profile. So, another profile review, please. White Asian male, 26-year-old, been lurking here for a while, wanted to solicit some advice. Hello, welcome, lurker. I very recently had a bit of mental health, had a career crisis, decided I want to apply for MBA programs in the fall of 2026 intake. Okay. Not entirely sure what I want to do professionally, but probably something finance operations focused, he says. So very, very vague goals. 4 years of work experience, again, in Big Four consulting, but mostly analytics work, not much strategy. Promoted twice. Okay. Undergraduate business degree, top 25, 3.9 GPA. Very nice. GRE, still need to prep for. You're leaving it pretty late, OP. Okay. ECs, basically my personal hobbies, basketball, maybe coaching youth basketball this fall. That might be interesting. School list. Okay. Not particularly worried about prestige, although these are some quite prestigious schools. MBB, big tech is not my goal. Therefore, I think I have some more flexibility on schools, but I do want to be near a big city. Okay. Target schools, NYU, Columbia in New York, USC Marshall, UCLA Anderson, Berkeley Haas on the West Coast, UT Austin, Northwestern Kellogg, Chicago Booth in and around Chicago, and London Business School is a bit of a curveball there across the pond in London. Right. Questions around timing. Is round one too late? Recommenders. Thoughts on whether these schools are going to be value add. Currently unemployed, might be unemployed, might quit job to focus on applications. Again, comes back to timeline. And how important are the essays? Right. We might need to knock some sense into OP here a little bit. Right, John, profile evaluation. How are you seeing this profile from a high level?
I think it's a fairly vanilla profile. I do see some pretty strong stats in here, so we can dive into those. Academically, that's a really solid GPA. Like what I'm seeing.
Sure.
The test that comes next will be a major bottleneck for round one if OP is thinking of applying in round one. I would aim for a minimum of 325 for the GRE, or maybe like a 670, 665 GMAT. Professional, look, Big Four consulting, fairly standard. We have 2 promos, and that's what schools like to see. Sponsorship would be a plus. I know OP didn't mention sponsorship, but business schools love people who are sponsored because that means that they have employment post MBA. They don't have to give them scholarships. And if OP doesn't plan to remain in consulting, being sponsored is a marker that you are doing well at your current job. I know OP is honest by saying that there isn't much strategy and more analytics, but you can always reposition your resume to not to reveal too many of your cards essentially. Demographically, I'm assuming I'm assuming OP is a Hapa, so half Asian, half white. A little bit more rare in the applicant pool. Would be great, if there's anything there to explore this in the supplementary or optional essays. There are some schools that would be interested in learning about your heritage, OP. Over to you.
Yeah. Okay, great. I think the first and foremost, I think we need to talk about goals. That's jumping out at me here. It reads to me like OP is really not yet clear on what they want to do. Probably something finance operations focus is the extent to which OP has got their goals figured out. Now, this is a classic issue that we see across candidates all the time, right? John and I meet prospective clients on a regular basis, and I mean like, 2 or 3 per day often, right? And this comes up all the time. Oh, I don't really know what I want to do after the MBA. I was hoping I'd figure it out during the MBA. Now, that might be the case. We get it, right? In the real world, that's fine. But that's not what schools want to hear. So I'll tell you what we tell clients all the time is you're going to need to front load that career thinking. You're going to need to start already pre-MBA thinking about what you want to do after the MBA, or at least, not committing to it, but at least having some idea of what it is that you like and starting to funnel and focus your goals. So in this case, Big Four consulting doing analytics, look, there's quite a lot of interesting options for you there. The one that jumps to mind and kind of the first one I would explore with clients is doing analytics or corporate strategy at a company that is aligned with something you're interested in. So, for example, OP it mentions being interested in basketball. I have a friend who does business development at the Toronto Maple Leafs, right? So it's like the group that owns the hockey team, right? You can do corporate development analytics in sports, and that might be an interesting goal that uses your professional experience, but also aligns with what you're passionate about, which is clearly basketball. So start thinking already about these goals because it's going to be important. And by the way, this is something that John and I do with clients day in, day out, and is a key reason why we work with clients and why clients hire admissions consultants. So worth bearing that in mind. Okay, so that's the first thing. John, any thoughts on goals that I've missed there?
No, I'm completely with you there, Sam. OP needs to define what those goals are, even if they are not goals that OP is not planning on really diving into. But what you mentioned about bridging over the analytical expertise could be a really a somewhat differentiated offer, or at least one that signals that the OP kind of has an idea of what he wants to do post MBA. So I am aligned with you on that approach.
Okay, cool. So that's on the, and actually, but yeah, building on that, one thing that I noticed, John, about these extracurriculars is that they don't seem, certainly the ones he's got already, seem like kind of classic solo hobbies. And again, we've talked about this in the past, schools are looking for community builders. Wharton SA2, how will you contribute to our community? You're not going to, well, probably not going to, play guitar. Like, I don't know. That's not obvious.
Yeah.
So I think this line here, I may be coaching youth basketball. I think OP, you should be really hammering home on this. You should really be focusing on this. Do whatever you need to do to get that gig as a youth basketball coach, because there's a lot of potential stories that can come off the back of that, right? Whether it's mentoring a student or a basketball player who had a difficult background or was going through something difficult, and you've got a mentorship story, a leadership story. It could be how you brought the team together and you've got a community building story. This, to me, seems like an absolutely crucial line in OP's application that I think maybe he's not giving enough credit to.
Yeah. I think basketball in so many ways, there's a team element. There's, there's so many things, there's so many different threads you could pull at from this basketball angle.
Yeah. I worked with a client a couple of years ago who talked about starting a basketball academy as his long-term goal. I love that. I love that. Right. Okay. So realistically, questions being asked. These are quite pointed questions. And I think quite a lot of, common questions we see. So John, let's go through them. One, realistically, am I too late for round one? He has not done GRE yet, and it's 27th of June as we speak. Deadlines are early September, first week of September, thereabouts. So July, August, September-ish, 2 and a bit months to do the GRE and applications for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 schools. Cutting it tight, right, John?
OP could be a whiz of a test taker, but in my experience, Sam, you know, if you haven't taken the actual test yet, if you're prepping, folks take it at least 2 to 3 times. This is going to be a real crunch for round 1. I would assume round 2 at the earliest, and not next year.
Yeah, I'd echo that. I think the one thing that, in my experience, people try and take on too much at the same time, working, studying, and applying, and they end up screwing up all 3. And so if I was OP, I would be focused 100% on GRE, well, plus job. And there's a question about this later, but GRE and job. If you can nail the test first time, you know, it sometimes happens, then maybe you can apply, you'll have time to apply to a few schools in round 1. But my base case here is that you're going to be focusing on the GRE, take it a couple of times, get your score as good as you can, and apply in round 2. Yeah. Okay. With this many schools, as we said, 9 schools, there will be quite a burden on the recommenders. Can they recycle their essays, or should I consider applying to fewer schools? John?
Ooh, there are definitely well, let me say this. I would say 90% of schools take what's called the common letter of recommendation, right? It's the same progression of questions, you know, the relationship to your the person applying, you know, what are the principles, how they compare to their peers, time when you give when you gave them, and when you delivered feedback and what the reaction was, anything optional, and then this grid of things that they would grade them on. Most schools use that, and so you can typically recycle the same anecdotes for that school. Obviously, there are some programs that have nuances. NYU has its own set of questions. MIT's is a little different, and then Kellogg has one that, you know, was a little bit diversity related, but they recently changed it. And so
Wharton as well. Wharton have a different set of questions. You can
correct.
recycle content, but the question prompts are different.
Correct.
Yeah, Wharton's not actually on the list, so I'm getting a bit going off topic there. But anyway, okay. So the short answer there is you can recycle questions, but even so, 9 schools is going to be a big ask of your recommenders, particularly if they're under time pressure. Okay, what are your thoughts on student experience from these schools? Does my background give me a realistic chance? Okay, John, let's just answer this question with your perspective, because you're at Berkeley Haas, where you studied and were a MBA admissions evaluator.
Sure.
Do you think Berkeley Haas can enable a Big 4 consultant to pivot into a finance/operations role?
I think if you can make an argument that you've rendered some of this work for clients during your time at a Big 4 consulting firm, yes, I think it is possible. It's not the easiest transition, but definitely I have seen folks, classmates of mine, who have gone on to do similar things.
Okay. Right. So that answers that question very, very clearly. Right. And then now let's talk about this. The question is, what if I quit my job to focus on the GRE now? So
I would.
Okay. So you'd be unemployed, but theoretically you could have a higher GRE score. How do you approach that decision, John?
I would advise against it, because when you apply to school and you're unemployed, you are in less of a position of power. Now, the calculus is different if you apply and then quit, which, you know, obviously defeats the purpose of taking time off. But at the time of applying, if you are still employed, that is accurate. That has no bearing on you know, whether you quit afterwards. Now, the ethics of it, we can argue about it later. But I would not recommend OP do it. I would recommend, you know, cutting down on social time, finding other avenues to free up time, but I would probably not quit their job unless they have absolutely zero time to commit to any of these, you know, to applying or studying for this test.
I think it'd be quite a bit reckless, to be honest. I think I would rather coast in your job, sacrifice social plans, which, by the way, everybody else is doing as well, right? Everybody sacrifices social plans to study for the GRE. That's normal. Sacrifice study plan, social plans, coast at work. What a lot of
Mm-hmm.
people do is take like max out their vacation in August, for
Mm-hmm.
example, to
Mm-hmm.
focus on MBA applications. That's quite common. Coast at work as much as you can get away with, but stay employed. And
Yep.
now, if we kind of align that with what we were saying before in terms of what this timeline should look like, look, round one is highly unlikely anyway, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
highly, whether you quit your job, whatever you end up doing, like round one is going to be a stretch. I would much prefer a scenario where you stay employed, take your time studying for the next 3 months, take your time applying in round two, and submit a round two application. That is a far more sensible, low risk approach than trying to chuck everything at round one and quit your job and abandon all your friends and whatever else is involved. That's fairly, I think you're aligned, John, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Right. And then last thing, how important are the essays? Look, I'm not going to humor this with too much time, but I think it's fair to say they are important. Now, they're not important because they're assessing your ability to write. Everybody knows, Grammarly and ChatGPT are out there. Everybody can write now. They're assessing how well do you know yourself and how well do you know your goals? Because people who don't know their goals are not going to get the most out of an MBA program. So the essays are super important. Right. John, let's move on to profile number 5, I believe. Yes, 5. Okay, we have a FANG software engineer. Another software engineer. I told you these are common. It's absolutely true. Now, this time we have a 28-year-old Pakistani software engineer with a green card in the US, 705 GMAT, but a GPA of only 3.22, with a degree in computer science from a T20 computer science program. Think UMD, Purdue, etc. Work experience. I think the key takeaway here, John, one, we have FANG as a brand. That's nice. But we also have, I see this as, I think it's 6 different roles in the space of 3 or so years. 4 months as a software engineer at a Pinterest or Uber, followed by 4 months as a software engineer at a company that went bankrupt, followed by a year and a half at a software engineer that's FANG, a year at another software engineer, 14 months at another software engineer, large tech, think Oracle, and another year at FANG. This OP seems to have worked at every single big tech company in existence. I don't know, is that a red flag or a pink flag or a green flag? I'm not sure. We'll talk about it. Extracurriculars, religious organization president in college, 5 years of tutoring, owns several real estate properties. Okay. Why MBA? Transition into product. Right. So, John, the classic software engineer to product management pivot. Goals: Harvard, Stanford, Wharton, CBS, Booth, Haas, Sloan. I'm worried that I'll be labeled a job hopper. That's very possible. Right. John, overall profile, how do you see it?
I like this profile overall, Sam. I think that there are a couple kinks in it, but we can talk about it and about how we iron those out. Software engineer with a subpar GPA, admittedly, but a strong GMAT. I think that's the main takeaway here. The GPA is low, but it's not completely out of range for many of these schools. I've seen cases of people with similar GPAs as OP get into schools. Make no mistake, it is still going to be a dampener, but that GMAT is strong. I would be prepared to explain what has driven that low GPA in their optional essay.
Computer science is a tough program, right?
Correct. Professionally, hopped around quite a bit, but look, the reality is that there are a lot of layoffs in this industry, and so what has happened to OP is most likely beyond their control. It could be a simple explanation again in the optional essay. The beauty is that OP has stayed in the same function. There is some trajectory, some kind of arc throughout this, journey. OP has stuck to reputable brands that people know well and respect.
Yeah.
And so I would say, yes, it would be noted. I don't see it as a red flag if communicated and articulated well. I like some of the extracurriculars there. The real estate, how many, is there a management process associated? This could potentially be kind of cool and maybe feed into a core narrative if there is one around making the industry better or more dynamic. Demographically, Pakistani Canadian, I wouldn't say it's a total ORM. I think there are some elements there that could lead people to think so, but I don't see it as ORM versus an applicant from India or an Indian American. So I think this is a fairly strong profile in some regards. I would be curious to hear your take, Sam, on the churn with those companies.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think the brands are the rescuing factor here, right? If
Yeah.
it's a small world, and if OP had really had screwed up at Pinterest, they're not going to get an offer from Meta, later.
Hmm.
Like
Yeah.
it doesn't seem to me like this is an issue of performance because and mainly because of those brands and
Sure.
how reputable they are. But I do think you need to dedicate real estate in the optional essay to this.
Hmm.
And the schools that have like a long optional essay, I think Wharton gives you 500 words for this, for example.
Yeah.
Um, you're probably gonna have a stronger profile at those schools, to be honest. I think you're gonna need real estate to explain this. I would encourage you to explain it step by step. Don't try and generalize.
Hmm.
Explain why that company went bankrupt. Name the companies, obviously. Explain what happened, and really be granular about it. Certainly, don't try and hide it. Really
Hmm.
be open about it in those optional essays. And then I think, yeah, it could be doable. It could be you could make it work. You might even be able to make it work to your advantage. John, do you think
Hmm.
there's a scenario where this could actually come through as a positive?
I think it could. I have noticed an opportunity to upskill myself. I felt my impact was better suited elsewhere. I think there's a couple things to say. I wouldn't oversell it though. I wouldn't oversell it.
Do you think maybe there's a chance? I want to pivot into product management. I've seen how all of these different software companies develop products, different
Hmm.
workflows, different
Hmm.
priorities, different values. And I'm going to bring all of that experience together into a product management role. There might
Hmm.
be an argument there that OP would be a better PM given all of this experience, given this perspective, than
Correct.
without.
I agree. I had another thought that kind of ties that back to that, Sam, and it's the potential roadblock with finding the right recommenders, right? So
Ah,
recommenders would have witnessed or managed OP for a short amount of time, and there are companies there where they've returned to the same company, but it could be in a different role. They could have another supervisor. Either way, maybe that stint at that tech company like Oracle would probably be the best place to get the recommender endorsement. But either way, the recommender would play a role in bridging many of these disparate experiences together, is
yeah.
what I think would be the challenge with
And
OP's profile.
reassuring that it's not a performance issue, that
Correct.
it's,
Correct.
yeah, okay. Interesting. Um, One thing that I like is we've worked with countless software engineers who are talking about pivoting into product management, right? It's a classic
Hmm.
narrative, and the schools know it can work. The thing that differentiates the people who do that successfully and the people who don't, in my experience, is people who can attach another element of impact to it. For
Hmm.
example, I want to pivot into product management in a niche industry that I have some attachment to,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? So, for example, OP talks about owning several real estate properties, has maybe experienced all of
Hmm.
the friction involved in transacting properties, and has maybe identified a tech solution
Yeah.
to massage this pain point
Yeah.
and to solve this problem. So,
Yeah.
my goal is to take this broad range of experience, pivot into a product management position at a tech company that is building software solutions for real estate developers, for example. That's really nice. That allows you to take your work experience, but also focus it on this area that you're clearly passionate about. Just a thought.
Yeah. I like that.
Cool. Okay, good. Next profile. So it's sort of a profile, sort of a bonus question. John, OP's questioning JD versus MBA, or a JD MBA, in other words, a joint degree.
Hmm.
Background, undergrad and masters in finance. GPA is low, 3.3, 3.4. Current role, 1 to 2 years of full-time of experience in industry, focused on valuation and modeling, in other words, a finance role. Interned in MBB, private equity, big four. wondering about on the MBA side, pros, strong path into investment banking, MBB, etc., networking, no GPA during the program, and be able to get a wide spectrum of lucrative jobs. Doesn't provide deep experience, deep expertise as a con, potentially requires 2 to 3 more years of work experience to be competitive. That's correct. Hard to get into an M7, as we know. Value the fun, but I'm not a party person. An MBA feels quite focused on parties and the social side. I make more mistakes with numbers than words. Interesting. Thoughts on the JD? Pros are I review and draft contracts in my current role. Mastering law feels highly professional. I like quiet private spaces in law firms. Hard to get fired from big law than from IB. They sponsor visas. Interesting here. Remote work is a factor at law firms. Cons, although I enjoy working with contracts, I've found many lawyers are quite boring. Okay. Client interactions can be stressful, and legal work may be more vulnerable to AI automation. Interesting. So, John, lots and lots of stuff to go with here. What jumps out at you?
I think there's an argument. I think I am getting the sense that OP is a little bit more energized by a law degree. OP has some choice words about lawyers, which we won't, repeat. But I think there's an opportunity for JD MBA. Look, I mean, JD MBA reconciles many of these pros that OP is seeing. And let's not forget, OP is a little young for an MBA currently, right? And, typically those who want to pursue a JD MBA do so earlier on in their career, which is appropriate for OP's background. I think, OP seems to be more passionate about the scholarly work of drafting of contracts, and so I see benefits both ways. We both have a bias, Sam. We both pursued our MBAs, and the network goes a long way. All those things about visas and remote work, you can get it. You can get that with an MBA. We get a job in MBA too. It's just a matter of finding the right avenue for it. So I think OP seems to be grabbing at some reasons that don't quite add up for me. My instinct is JD over MBA, but the ideal scenario is both. What do you think?
I think the JD MBA is pretty spot on. But it's literally designed for people who are kind of torn between law and business and want background in both. The downside is it's an extra year, right? JD MBA program, typically 3 years, where versus an MBA that's 2. Like, I think that OP, the very fact that OP is kind of debating between the two, needs a JD MBA to get exposure to both, to make the right decision.
Yeah.
And it looks like OP's role, whether it's in a big law firm, it's going to have a bit of a business angle. Whether it's in the business world, it's going to have a law angle to it. It looks like where OP's career is trending is a kind of overlap between both anyway. So yeah, go with both. Figure out which one stimulates you more, which one will surround you with the people that you would like being with. It's true. I mean, there is. Okay, it's true. I mean, there is a stereotype for sure that MBAs are a bit more social, a bit more fun, if you like, and then lawyers are a bit more analytical, a bit more boring. That fine. You'll figure that out during the MBA, during the JD MBA, and you will have a strong idea at the end of it which one you prefer. Right now, OP doesn't have a strong idea, and I think the JD MBA is the only way to really get it. A couple of points that I want to specifically pick on. The one that really stands out to me is that I make mistakes with I make more mistakes with numbers than words. Now, look, we talk a lot about standardized test scores because it's a core part of the application process. The GRE, the GMAT quant is important in your chances of getting in. But an MBA as a degree is not that quantity, right? And certainly if you choose your pathway and your electives and you go down a non-quantity route, there is no need for quant to be an issue and a barrier for you to get into an MBA. There really isn't. So I would say this is not really a factor. They say MBA classes are made up of poets and quants. You're a poet. That's fine. That's one point that I'd like to make. And the other one I'd like to say is just from a sort of to end on a bit of a philosophical view is OP. It sounds like you need a mentor. Sounds like you need a mentor who's been through these programs or at least these industries who can guide you, because you're really working on stereotypes right now. And a mentor will help you axe through those stereotypes and really get to the point. And it's important, you're early in your career, you clearly have potential. Figure out now what it is you like. A JD MBA and a mentor will help with that. John?
Yep, I am aligned with that. Look, I mean, your yeah, I mean, your dissertation of poets versus quants is the right one. Some people are skilled at both, but for the most part, you don't need to be incredibly quantitatively inclined to both get into and succeed in an MBA program. There is a baseline, of course. That's why, you know, the GMAT and GRE is in place. But the reason why an MBA is such a wonderful place is because you have people from so many different backgrounds who excel in their individual areas, and that's what makes for an environment where people can learn and feed off of each other.
Yeah, excellent. All right, well, on that slightly philosophical, soft, gushy narrative, let's end there for today. John, really, really nice to catch up with you as always. Great that the Reddit MBA thread is really live and kicking. If you're watching this and you're either recruiting an MBA consultant right now, hiring an MBA consultant right now, get in touch. We can help. If you'd like your profile to be evaluated, tag us on Reddit, send us a DM. We can help. We will add that to our list next week. And if you enjoyed this video and you'd like to watch more Reddit roasts, subscribe, and we will be publishing these at least once a week. Last week, we actually published 2. So with that, John, have a lovely weekend. I'll see you soon.
Likewise. Bye, Sam.
See ya.